At Osh, in 30 hours, on December 31, 1942, Commander Robert Sherbrooke stood on the bridge of destroyer HMS Onslow, watching HMS Sheffield emerge from a snow squall 4,000 yards to the southwest. Sheffield was a town-class light cruiser sister ship to Belfast and Edinburgh, displacing 11,550 tons and mounting 12 6-inch guns. She was steaming at 28 knots, her battle ensign streaming from her mainmast, heading directly toward the sound of gunfire that had been echoing across the Barents Sea for the past hour. Sheffield was alone. No other British heavy ships were within 50 miles. But between Sheffield and safety stood the German heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, displacing 18 200 tons and mounting 8 8-inch guns, and the pocket battleship Lutzow, displacing 16 200 tons and mounting 6 11-inch guns. The Germans had been attacking convoy JW-51B for an hour, attempting to destroy the 14 defenseless merchant ships carrying war supplies to the Soviet Union. Commander Sherbrooke's destroyer force of 5 destroyers had been fighting desperately to hold off the German attack. Sherbrooke himself had been wounded, his face shredded by shell splinters, one eye destroyed. HMS Onslow was damaged, her forward guns knocked out. HMS Acades was sinking, her hull riddled with 8-inch shells from Admiral Hipper. HMS Obedient and HMS Obdurate were damaged. The destroyers had fought with extraordinary courage, charging repeatedly at the vastly superior German forces, launching torpedoes, making smoke, placing themselves between the enemy and the convoy. But they could not hold much longer. They were being methodically destroyed by ships that outweighed them 10-1. Then Sheffield arrived. Captain Addis Clark, commanding Sheffield, had received Sherbrooke's desperate signals reporting the attack 90 minutes earlier. Sheffield had been 50 miles south of the convoy, escorting a different convoy. Clark made an immediate decision. He detached Sheffield from her convoy, leaving the convoy protected only by destroyers, and raced north at maximum speed toward the sound of battle. Clark knew that Sheffield alone could not defeat Admiral Hipper and Lutzow in a gun duel. Sheffield's 6-inch guns could not penetrate the German ship's armor at long range. But Clark also knew that the German admiral commanding the attack, Vice Admiral Oskar Kumitz, had strict orders from Adolf Hitler: do not risk the ships. Hitler had become obsessed with preserving his remaining heavy surface units after losing Bismarck in 1941. German surface ships were forbidden to accept damage, even if it meant abandoning their missions. Clark intended to exploit that restriction. If Sheffield attacked aggressively enough, if she closed range and threatened the German ships with torpedoes, if she demonstrated willingness to accept damage to inflict damage, the German admiral might withdraw rather than risk his ships. It was psychological warfare, not physical warfare. Sheffield was gambling that the German admiral valued ship preservation more than mission accomplishment. If the gamble failed, if the Germans stood and fought, Sheffield would be destroyed. But if the gamble succeeded, convoy JW-51B would be saved. At 09:31 hours, Sheffield opened fire on Admiral Hipper at 13,000 yards. The battle that would become known as the Battle of the Barents Sea entered its decisive phase. HMS Sheffield was a town-class light cruiser, the third ship of the Southampton subclass, a group of 5 ships that preceded the Edinburgh subclass. Sheffield was laid down at Vickers Armstrong's shipyard in Newcastle on January 31, 1935. The Southampton-class ships were slightly smaller than the later Edinburgh-class, displacing 11 350-ton standard versus 11 550 tons, but were otherwise nearly identical in design. Sheffield was 591 feet long with a beam of 61.6 feet and a draft of 17.3 feet. Main armament consisted of 12 6-inch Mark .3 guns in 4 triple turrets, 2 forward and 2 aft. Secondary armament consisted of 8 4-inch dual-purpose guns in twin mounts. Anti-aircraft armament included 2 octuple 2-pounder pom-pom mounts. Propulsion consisted of 4 Admiralty 3-drum boilers feeding 4 Parsons geared turbines generating 75,000 shaft horsepower, driving 4 screws, producing a maximum speed of 32 knots. Range was 8,000 nautical miles at 13 knots. Armor protection was typical for the class: 4.5-inch belt, 3-inch deck over magazines, 4-inch turret faces, 4-inch conning tower. Like her sisters Edinburgh and Belfast, Sheffield had no torpedo bulges and minimal underwater protection. The design prioritized gun armament and speed over survivability. Sheffield was launched on July 23, 1936, and commissioned on August 25, 1937, 2 years before the war began. Her pre-war service consisted of fleet exercises and goodwill visits to foreign ports. When war began in September 1939, Sheffield was assigned to the Home Fleet conducting convoy escort duties and patrols in the North Sea and North Atlantic. Sheffield's early war service was active but not dramatic. She participated in the Norwegian campaign in April 1940, providing gunfire support for British forces and anti-aircraft defense against Luftwaffe attacks. In May 1940, Sheffield participated in the hunt for the German battleship Bismarck, though she did not engage the battleship directly. Her most notable early action came on May 26, 1941, when British carrier aircraft from HMS Ark Royal mistakenly attacked Sheffield, thinking she was Bismarck. The aircraft launched 11 torpedoes at Sheffield from close range. Sheffield maneuvered violently, and all torpedoes either missed or malfunctioned their magnetic exploders, detonating prematurely. Sheffield survived unscathed, but the incident revealed serious defects in British torpedo design that were subsequently corrected. In 1941 and 1942, Sheffield was assigned to convoy escort duties in the Arctic, protecting convoys carrying supplies from Britain to the Soviet Union through the Barents Sea. The Arctic convoys were extraordinarily dangerous operations. Convoys faced German U-boats, Luftwaffe bombers, and the constant threat of German surface raiders operating from bases in northern Norway. The German surface threat was significant. By late 1942, Germany had stationed the battleship Tirpitz, the pocket battleships Admiral Scheer and Lutzow, and the heavy cruisers Admiral Hipper and Prince Eugen in Norwegian fjords. These ships posed a constant threat to Arctic convoys. If they sortied together, they could destroy an entire convoy before British heavy ships could intervene. The strategic situation was complicated by Adolf Hitler's direct involvement in German naval operations. After Bismarck was sunk in May 1941, Hitler became convinced that surface ships were vulnerable and expensive. He restricted their operations, issuing standing orders that German capital ships could only sortie if they had overwhelming superiority air cover and minimal risk of damage. Hitler valued ship preservation over mission accomplishment. This restriction frustrated German admirals who believed ships should be used aggressively, accepting risk to accomplish missions. But Hitler's orders were absolute. German surface ships operated under constraints that British ships did not face. On December 22, 1942, convoy JW-51B departed Loch Ewe, Scotland, heading for Murmansk. The convoy consisted of 14 merchant ships carrying tanks, aircraft ammunition, and other war supplies. The escort consisted of 6 destroyers under Commander Robert Sherbrooke, 2 corvettes, a minesweeper, and a trawler. Additionally, 2 cruisers HMS Sheffield and HMS Jamaica under Rear Admiral Robert Burnett were positioned 50 miles south of the convoy as a covering force. The plan was for the destroyers to escort the convoy directly, while the cruisers provided distant support, intervening if German heavy ships attacked. German intelligence detected the convoy through aerial reconnaissance and radio intercepts. On December 30, 1942, German Naval Command ordered a surface attack. Vice Admiral Oskar Kummetz, commanding from the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, was ordered to intercept and destroy JW-51B. Kummetz's force consisted of Admiral Hipper, the pocket battleship Lutzow, and 6 destroyers. The plan was for Lutzow to attack the convoy from the south, while Admiral Hipper attacked from the north, catching the escort in a pincer movement. Kummetz was given strict orders from Hitler: engage only if conditions are favorable, avoid damage, withdraw if faced with superior force. The orders were contradictory. How could Kummetz destroy a convoy while avoiding damage and withdrawing if faced with superior force? The contradiction would paralyze German decision-making during the battle. At 08:30 hours on December 31, 1942, German destroyers made contact with the convoy. At 09:30 hours, Admiral Hipper appeared from the north, approaching at 28 knots. Commander Sherbrooke immediately ordered his destroyers to attack, placing themselves between Admiral Hipper and the convoy. The destroyers charged toward Admiral Hipper, making smoke-firing guns threatening torpedo attacks. Admiral Hipper opened fire at 09:30 hours from 12,000 yards. Her 8-inch guns had far greater range and penetrating power than the destroyer's 4.7-inch guns. At 0932 hours, Admiral Hipper's first salvo hit HMS Onslow Sherbrooke's flagship. The shell penetrated the bridge, exploding inside. Sherbrooke was wounded severely, shell splinters tearing through his face, destroying his left eye and part of his nose. Blood poured from his wounds, blinding him. But Sherbrooke remained on the bridge, continuing to command the destroyer force despite his injuries. Over the next 30 minutes, the British destroyers engaged in a running fight with Admiral Hipper. The destroyers used smokescreens, radical maneuvers, and torpedo threats to keep Admiral Hipper at bay. But they were being hit repeatedly. HMS Sheffield was struck by multiple 8-inch shells. Her hull was riddled. Fires burned out of control. She was sinking. At 1,000 hours, Sherbrooke, now barely conscious from blood loss, transferred tactical command to Lieutenant Commander Kinloch on HMS Obedient. Sherbrooke was taken below for medical treatment. He had commanded the destroyer force for 30 minutes after being wounded, preventing Admiral Hipper from reaching the convoy. His actions would earn him the Victoria Cross. But by 1,000 hours, the situation was desperate. Kate's was sinking. Onslow was damaged. The remaining destroyers were running low on ammunition. Admiral Hipper had withdrawn temporarily after encountering fierce destroyer resistance, but she was maneuvering for another attack. Worse, Lutzow had appeared from the south, closing on the convoy from the opposite direction. The pincer was forming. The destroyers could not defend against attacks from two directions simultaneously. The convoy was about to be slaughtered. At 0930 hours, 50 miles south of the convoy, Rear Admiral Robert Barents stood on Sheffield's bridge, listening to radio reports from Sherbrooke's destroyers. The reports were fragmentary but clear. The convoy was under attack by German heavy ships. The destroyers were fighting desperately but were outgunned. Barents faced a decision. His orders were to remain with his own convoy 50 miles south. If he detached Sheffield and Jamaica to assist JW-51B, his convoy would be unprotected. But if he did not assist JW-51B, would be destroyed. Barents made his decision in seconds. He ordered Sheffield and Jamaica to proceed north at maximum speed toward JW-51B. His own convoy would have to take its chances with destroyer escort only. At 0931 hours, Sheffield and Jamaica increased speed to 31 knots, racing north. The distance was 50 miles. At 31 knots, they would reach the battle in approximately 90 minutes, but 90 minutes might be too late. The convoy could be destroyed in 30 minutes if Admiral Hipper and Lutzow pressed their attacks. Barents needed to close faster. He ordered speed increased to maximum available 32 knots. Sheffield's engines strained. The turbines vibrated, but the ship accelerated. Every knot mattered. Every minute mattered. At 0950 hours, Sheffield's radar detected surface contacts 40 miles north. The contacts were large, moving fast. Admiral Hipper and the destroyers. Barents ordered Sheffield's gunnery officer to prepare for surface action. Sheffield's main battery was loaded with 6-inch shells. Fire control radars were activated. Range to target was calculated continuously. At 10:20 hours, Sheffield and Jamaica emerged from a snow squall and saw the battle. Smoke covered the horizon. Gun flashes lit the smoke from within. Destroyers were maneuvering frantically. One destroyer, HMS Sheffield, was clearly sinking down by the stern fires burning. Admiral Hipper was visible to the north, approximately 13,000 yards from Sheffield's position. At 10:23 hours, Sheffield opened fire. Her forward turrets erupted, sending 12 6-inch shells arcing toward Admiral Hipper. The shells took 22 seconds to reach target. They fell short. Sheffield's radar provided range data, but accuracy required several salvos to correct for wind temperature and target motion. The second salvo was over. The third salvo straddled Admiral Hipper. The fourth salvo achieved hits. At least 2 6-inch shells struck Admiral Hipper's superstructure. The shells could not penetrate the 3-inch belt armor, but they hit upper works, destroying radar antennas, starting small fires, killing or wounding crew members. Most importantly, the hits informed Admiral Cummins that he was now under attack from British cruisers. Cummins faced a decision. His orders from Hitler were clear: avoid damage, withdraw if faced with superior force. Were two British cruisers' superior force on paper, Admiral Hipper's 8 8-inch guns outranged and outpenetrated Sheffield's 12 6-inch guns. Lützow's 6 11-inch guns were even more powerful. Together, the German ships should destroy the British cruisers, but Hitler's orders created uncertainty. If Kummetz pressed the attack, and his ships were damaged, Hitler would be furious. Kummetz might be relieved of command, or worse, German officers had been executed for less. But if Kummetz withdrew without accomplishing his mission, Hitler would also be furious. The contradiction paralyzed Kummetz. He chose the safest course, temporary withdrawal, while assessing the situation. At 10:25 hours, Admiral Hipper turned away to the north opening range from Sheffield. Sheffield pursued, continuing to fire. The range opened to 15,000 yards, near the maximum effective range of Sheffield's 6-inch guns. Sheffield's shells were landing close to Admiral Hipper, but hits were infrequent. Admiral Hipper returned fire with her 8-inch guns. Her shells landed near Sheffield, sending up columns of water 100 feet high. But Sheffield maneuvered continuously, changing course unpredictably, making herself a difficult target. Neither side was landing hits consistently, but Sheffield was accomplishing her mission. Admiral Hipper was not attacking the convoy. She was fighting Sheffield. The convoy was escaping. But at 10:30 hours, a new threat appeared. Lützow, which had been approaching the convoy from the south, altered course toward Sheffield. Lützow's 6 11-inch guns were far more dangerous than Admiral Hipper's 8-inch guns. An 11-inch shell could penetrate Sheffield's armor at almost any range. If Lützow engaged Sheffield, Sheffield would be in serious danger. Captain Clark assessed the situation. Sheffield was now facing two German heavy ships, one with 8-inch guns and one with 11-inch guns. The combined firepower was overwhelming, but the convoy was still escaping to the east, making smoke protected by the remaining destroyers. If Sheffield could keep the German ships focused on her for another 30 minutes, the convoy would escape into the darkness and snow squalls that characterized Arctic winter. Clark decided to maintain the engagement. At 10:32 hours, Lützow opened fire on Sheffield from 18,000 yards. Her 11-inch shells were massive, weighing 660 pounds each, compared to Sheffield's 112-pound 6-inch shells. The first salvo landed 1,000 yards short. The second salvo straddled Sheffield's shells, landing on both sides. Clark ordered radical maneuvers. Sheffield turned hard to port, then hard to starboard, then back to port, changing course every 20 seconds. The maneuvers made gunnery nearly impossible. Sheffield's own guns could not fire accurately while maneuvering violently, but they also made Sheffield a nearly impossible target. Lützow's shells continued to fall close, but none hit. At 10:40 hours, Admiral Hipper turned back toward the battle, attempting to close range on Sheffield. Sheffield was now between Admiral Hipper to the north and Lützow to the south, exactly the position the German plan had intended to catch the convoy. But instead of 14 defenseless merchant ships, the Germans had caught a British light cruiser commanded by a captain who refused to withdraw. Sheffield engaged both German ships simultaneously. Her forward turrets fired at Admiral Hipper. Her aft turrets fired at Lützow. The gunnery was not accurate. Sheffield was maneuvering too violently for precision fire, but volume of fire was impressive. Sheffield was firing approximately 15 rounds per minute from her 12 guns, 180 shells per minute total. The shells created splashes around both German ships, making gunnery difficult for the Germans as well. At 10:45 hours, HMS Jamaica, which had been following Sheffield, entered the battle. Jamaica was a colony-class light cruiser smaller than Sheffield, but armed with 12 6-inch guns. Jamaica engaged Lützow from 14,000 yards, hitting her with several shells that caused minor damage. Lützow turned away opening range. At 10:50 hours, Admiral Kummetz made his decision. The British cruisers were too aggressive. They were refusing to withdraw despite being outgunned. The destroyers were still threatening torpedo attacks. The convoy was escaping. Further attacks would require accepting damage. Hitler's orders were clear: avoid damage. At 10:55 hours, Kummetz ordered withdrawal. Admiral Hipper and Lützow turned north, breaking contact, heading back toward Norway. Sheffield pursued briefly, firing at the retreating German ships, but at 1100 hours, Admiral Burnett ordered Sheffield to break off pursuit. The German ships were faster than Sheffield and were pulling away. The mission was accomplished. The convoy was safe. By 11:30 hours, the Battle of the Barents Sea was over. Convoy JW-51B had survived with all 14 merchant ships intact. The British had lost one destroyer, HMS Sheffield, and one minesweeper, HMS Bramble, which had been sunk earlier in the battle. Casualties were 250 world. The Germans had lost one destroyer, Friedrich Eckelt, sunk by Sheffield during a confused engagement in the poor visibility. German casualties were approximately 40 killed. But the strategic impact was far greater than the ship losses suggested. The battle demonstrated that German surface raiders could be driven off by inferior British forces if those British forces fought aggressively. The battle humiliated the German Navy in Hitler's eyes. When Hitler learned that Admiral Hipper and Lutzow had been driven off by destroyers and light cruisers, he was furious. On January 6, 1943, Hitler summoned Grand Admiral Erich Raeder to the Reich Chancellery and subjected him to a 90-minute tirade about the failure at the Barents Sea. Hitler declared that German surface ships were worthless, cowardly, and wasted resources. He ordered all major surface ships decommissioned and scrapped. Their guns would be removed and used for coastal defense. The crews would be transferred to U-boats. Raeder protested, but Hitler was immovable. Raeder resigned in protest on January 30, 1943. His replacement, Admiral Karl Dönitz, convinced Hitler to rescind the scrapping order. But German surface ships were essentially confined to port for the rest of the war. Tirpitz remained in Norwegian fjords, never sortied against convoys again, and was eventually sunk by RAF bombers in 1944. The Battle of the Barents Sea effectively ended the German surface threat to Arctic convoys. The tactical analysis reveals Sheffield's critical role. When Sheffield arrived at 10:23 hours, the German attack was succeeding. The destroyers were being overwhelmed. The convoy was exposed. Admiral Hipper and Lutzow were positioned to destroy the convoy within 30 minutes. Sheffield's intervention changed the tactical calculus. Sheffield's aggressive engagement forced Admiral Cummins to fight Sheffield instead of attacking the convoy. The destroyer force, relieved of pressure from Admiral Hipper, was able to regroup and continue protecting the convoy. HMS Jamaica's arrival, 20 minutes later, reinforced Sheffield, convincing Cummins that he faced a significant British force. The combination of aggressive destroyer attacks and aggressive cruiser attacks created the impression that British forces were stronger and more determined than they actually were. The psychological analysis reveals the importance of perception in naval combat. Sheffield could not actually defeat Admiral Hipper and Lutzow in a gun duel. Sheffield's 6-inch guns could not penetrate German armor at long range. Sheffield's armor could not defeat German 8-inch and 11-inch shells. On paper, Sheffield should have been destroyed. But Captain Clark's aggressive tactics created the perception that Sheffield was willing to fight to the death. Clark closed range maneuvered violently, fired continuously, and refused to withdraw despite being outgunned. That aggression convinced Admiral Cummins that Sheffield represented a serious threat. Combined with Hitler's orders to avoid damage, Cummins chose withdrawal over continuing the attack. The comparison with other naval engagements reveals a pattern. At the Battle off Samar in October 1944, American destroyers and escort carriers drove off a Japanese battleship force through aggressive tactics despite overwhelming Japanese superiority. At the Battle of the River Plate in December 1939, 3 British cruisers drove off the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee through coordinated aggressive attacks. The pattern is clear. Aggressive tactics by inferior forces can defeat superior forces if the superior force is unwilling to accept damage. Sheffield demonstrated this principle perfectly at the Barents Sea. She was outnumbered and outgunned, but she fought as though she had the advantage. The Germans, restricted by Hitler's orders, could not match her aggression. Commander Sherbrooke was awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions during the battle, fighting for 30 minutes after being severely wounded, losing the sight in one eye, continuing to command his destroyers until he collapsed from blood loss. Captain Clark and Admiral Burnett were awarded lesser honors, but their tactical decisions were equally important. Clark's decision to attack aggressively despite being outgunned saved the convoy. Burnett's decision to detach Sheffield from her convoy and race north at maximum speed ensured Sheffield arrived in time to intervene. Both officers made decisions that violated conservative tactical doctrine but accomplished the mission. After the battle, Sheffield returned to convoy escort duties in the Arctic. She participated in multiple convoy operations through 1943 and 1944. In June 1944, Sheffield supported the D-Day landings at Normandy, bombarding German positions on Sword Beach. Her 6-inch guns provided fire support for British forces during the initial assault. Sheffield fired over 100 shells during the Normandy operation. After the war, Sheffield continued service with the Royal Navy, participating in various operations, including the Korean War in the 1950s. Sheffield was finally decommissioned in 1967 after 30 years of service. She was scrapped in 1967. Nothing remains of her except artifacts in museums and the memory of her finest hour at the Barents Sea. The strategic significance of the Battle of the Barents Sea extended beyond the immediate convoy victory. The battle proved that Arctic convoys could be protected from German surface raiders if British escorts fought aggressively. This knowledge allowed convoys to continue running throughout 1943 and 1944 despite the continued presence of German heavy ships in Norway. The convoys delivered approximately 4 million tons of supplies to the Soviet Union during the war, including 7,000 aircraft, 1,000 tanks, and vast quantities of ammunition, food, and raw materials. Those supplies helped sustain Soviet forces during critical phases of the war, particularly during the Stalingrad campaign in 1942-1943 and the subsequent Soviet offensives in 1943 and 1944. The human cost of Arctic convoy operations was severe. Approximately 3,000 British and Allied sailors died protecting Arctic convoys during World War II. They died from German U-boats, Luftwaffe attacks, surface raiders, and exposure in freezing Arctic waters. HMS Sheffield's crew participated in dozens of Arctic convoy operations, experiencing the constant danger and brutal conditions. Many suffered frostbite exposure and psychological trauma from continuous operations in darkness and cold. The Arctic convoys were among the most dangerous naval operations of World War II, and Sheffield's crew endured them repeatedly. The legacy of HMS Sheffield is her demonstration that courage and aggressive tactics can overcome superior firepower. Sheffield was a light cruiser facing a heavy cruiser and a pocket battleship. She was outgunned, outranged, and outnumbered, but she attacked as though she held the advantage. She closed-range fired continuously, maneuvered violently, and refused to withdraw. Her captain's tactical judgment was flawless. Her crew's execution was perfect. The combination saved convoy JW-51B, embarrassed the German Navy, and contributed to Hitler's decision to sideline German surface ships for the rest of the war. One light cruiser fighting alone changed the strategic balance in the Arctic. HMS Sheffield Town-class light cruiser commissioned August 25, 1937, decommissioned 1967, scrapped 1967. Length 591 feet, displacement 11,350 tons, armament 12 6-inch guns, top speed 32 knots. Greatest achievement, Battle of the Barents Sea, December 31, 1942, where she intervened alone against German heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper and pocket battleship Lutzow, forcing their withdrawal and saving convoy JW-51B. Casualties in the battle, none. Enemy ships damaged. Admiral Hipper hit multiple times. Lutzow hit multiple times. German destroyer Friedrich Eckholtz sunk. Strategic impact ended German surface threat to Arctic convoys, led to Admiral Raeder's resignation, convinced Hitler that surface ships were useless. The cruiser that fought alone, HMS Sheffield. The ship that charged when she should have retreated, that attacked when she was outgunned, that saved a convoy by refusing to admit she was inferior. The defense of convoy JW-51B. The Battle of the Barents Sea. One light cruiser versus 2 heavy ships. The light cruiser won because her captain fought as though losing was impossible. HMS Sheffield, the cruiser that fought alone and won.